President Trump calls it a waste of time, why he walked out of a meeting with Democrats to end the government shutdown. He tried to repeal the gas tax. Now a former city council member is going after public unions. How a recent Supreme Court ruling helps DeMaio's cause.
The Women's March really is a place for hope at the beginning of the year.
The keynote speaker for the San Diego's Women's March talks about the progress made in 2018 and the plan for this year's event. KPBS Evening Edition starts right now. Good evening, and thanks for joining us. I'm Ebony Monet. A high-level meeting to end the government shutdown ended today with a frustrated President Trump walking out of the room. The president met with Democratic leaders after meeting with fellow Republicans. He's still threatening to declare a national emergency to use military money to build a wall. Democrats refuse to include the president's request for $5 billion to reopen the government. Hundreds of thousands of federal workers will soon miss their first paycheck.
And he said, if I open up the government, you won't do what I want. That's cruel. That's callous. And that's using millions of innocent people as sort of pawns. And it was wrong. And then a few minutes later, he sort of slammed the table. And when Leader Pelosi said she didn't agree with the wall, he just walked out and said, we have nothing to discuss. So he said it was a waste of his time.
Tomorrow, President Trump will continue his pitch for a new border wall when he visits the border in Texas. President Trump is renewing his threat to withhold money for California wildfire victims. The president made the threat on Twitter today with a reference to his claim that forest management is a major factor in recent wildfires. FEMA could not respond to the president's tweet due to the government shutdown. Earlier this week, Governor Gov Newsoms and others requested more federal money for forest management. The governor's focus since taking office has included a push for universal health care. KPBS health reporter Susan Murphy has reaction from medical leaders here in San Diego.
Governor Newsom's plan includes reinstating a health insurance mandate. It provides financial aid to more people, including middle-income families, and it offers undocumented young people insurance access to age 26. Dr. David Bozzo is president of the San Diego County Medical Society. He says the governor's plan would steer people away from emergency rooms and lessen the financial burden on the overall system.
It's a lot more expensive to deliver that kind of care in an emergency room than it is in a primary care setting. So getting people coverage allows them the access to get into a primary care setting when they're less sick and at the appropriate time.
The governor also laid out a plan to provide 6 months of paid leave for new parents. Dr. Bozzo says healthy and early childhood development benefits the whole population.
If you have a better population in general from a nutritional standpoint, from a health standpoint, from just a socioeconomic and a mental health standpoint, I think everybody will do better.
The San Diego Medical Society is also optimistic about the governor's executive order to drive down prescription drug costs, saying it will boost savings and health services. The governor's funding plan for the health initiatives are expected to be released on Thursday. Susan Murphy, KPBS News.
Another prominent Democrat says he will run for mayor of San Diego. State Assembly member Todd Gloria announced his candidacy today. Gloria has also served on the San Diego City Council and was interim mayor for several months after the resignation of Bob Filner. Gloria's campaign will hold a formal kickoff event next week. City Council member Barbara Bree, also a local Democrat, says she'll also run for mayor in 2020. Last year, conservative activist DeMaio failed in his push to repeal the state's gas tax. As KPBS reporter Matt Hoffman explains, DeMaio has a new focus: public employee unions.
Last June, the Supreme Court ruled that government workers who choose not to join unions cannot be charged for costs associated with collective bargaining. Carl DeMaio, who heads the group Reform California, claims government unions aren't fairly representing their members.
The unions are taking the dues out of people's paychecks without their permission and funding politicians who are voting on laws that are to the detriment of those individuals.
In San Diego and Imperial Counties, SEIU Local 221 represents more than 13,000 county workers. They say this push by DeMaio is an attempt to weaken unions and lower workers' wages.
Do you think that the county would honestly play Oprah and just say, like, you get a raise, everyone gets raises? Absolutely not. Unions have been the front line of making sure that employees got what they need. But without our unions, we won't have that same voice. We won't have that same power. So I believe that our members will stand strong so that we continue to have this power.
Rebecca Friedrichs is a former teacher involved in a lawsuit against the California Teachers Association. She says local unions are helpful, but wishes they were separate from state and national unions, which tend to have political influence.
Yes, we want to unite locally, and we can do that without a state and national union.
Since the Supreme Court ruling last year, SEIU Local 221 says they have only lost a handful of members. Matt Hoffman, KPBS News.
Teachers for the state's largest school district will wait a few more days before going on strike. The LA Unified School District was facing a walkout as soon as tomorrow. Today, the teachers union announced it will wait until Monday. The school district is asking a judge to prevent a strike, claiming it hadn't been given a 10-day notice as required by law. LA hasn't seen a teacher strike in 30 years. Public schools in San Diego are getting more help to help low-income kids. KPBS education reporter Megan Burke says schools will have more control over how they spend it.
The district has always divvied up some $15.5 million in Title I funding across its schools. Next year, it will do the same and release another $8 million that, in the past, the central office would have spent on things like district-wide professional development. Superintendent Sydney Martin says now principals and parents will get to decide how to spend the money.
Placing trust in our schools to make the decisions that are best for the individual students that they serve.
Schools will see tens of thousands of extra dollars, with schools in low-income areas getting more. With their approval, the trustees also called for more parents to get engaged with their school site councils to weigh in on the spending. Megan Burks, KPBS News.
Organizers are gearing up for the third annual Women's March San Diego. The first one was fueled in part by fury over the election of President Donald Trump. Group leaders say the thousands of people that take part are marching for social change. What was your reaction to the huge turnout right from the gate?
You know, it gave me a lot of hope and a lot of excitement. Many of us had worked really hard during the 2016 election, and the results were not the type of results that we wanted. And as we have seen in the last 3 years, the policies that have come up have really impacted our communities, particularly in communities like San Diego. And so the Women's March really is a place for hope at the beginning of the year as we're starting off. And that's what 2017 was really about. It was really about hope and people coming together and energized about really moving forward together as a state and as a nation.
You know, thousands of people came out. What are you anticipating this year?
Well, we're hoping for everyone to come out and really make sure that we continue to show solidarity as a community. And rain or shine, it's going to happen. And it's just such a wonderful feeling when you're marching and you're there, and there's kids, there's families, their grandparents, and really people coming together, people with their networks, people with their communities. So like I live in the South Bay. We have a South Bay contingency of the Women's March, and there's a North County contingency. So it really is about community and bringing people together.
And on a national level, the Women's March has received some backlash recently. One of the founders was accused of not denouncing some anti-Semitic rhetoric. How has that conflict on the national level impacted the local chapter, or what are you doing to make sure it doesn't?
So, it's really important to note that the local San Diego chapter is not connected to the national chapter. We don't get any funding from them. There was a decision that was made to continue to use the same logo at the national level and as the state level. And, you know, at one point people had all sorts of different logos that they were using for the Women's March, and they decided that we're going to use one logo so that we're, you know, united in one front. But the reality is that we all, you know, the local march, specifically the San Diego March, has been very vocal about being anti-Semite. You know, we don't support any type of hate around religion or race or any issues like that. And so for us, it's really important that people know that this march in San Diego specifically is really about bringing people together.
And speaking of that, sometimes people get together and then the march is over, yes, and everyone kind of goes back to their respective places. Have you seen any tangible change come from these marches?
Yeah, so what's really exciting about the march, I think, is, I mean, I do believe that the wave that we just saw in Washington, D.C., the new Congress, is really a reflection of the work that's been taking place since 2017. I think it was really an opportunity for people to come together and not only march, but we marched to the voting booth, right? That was a real conversation that we all had during 2018. And then at the local level, you'll see that many of us got elected into offices, and a lot of diversity, a lot of really different opinions and ideologies. A lot of women getting elected into office in the county of San Diego as well. So I think the march has been bigger than that. It's sort of like it laid the foundation for all of us to come together and really kind of continue this work. There's still a lot of work to be done. I mean, there's a lot of dialogue that has to happen between our communities and a lot of issues that we still have to work on. But I think that this has been very hopeful in how we've been moving forward.
The third annual Women's March San Diego will take place Saturday, January 19th at 10 a.m. at Waterfront Park. For more information, go to womensmarchsd.org. National studies show nearly 1 in 3 women will experience violence in a relationship. Dina Martin of WGBH Boston reports on a national program that's teaching hairstylists what to watch for and how to help.
In over 30 years in business, Naz Kapelian has built a special relationship with his clients.
They ask you for advice. It could be about clothes, it could be about something they're buying.
The one-on-one time also makes it easy for Kapelian to spot when something is wrong, like he did with one client years ago.
There was a client came in with a fiance, and he sat right next to her, holding her hand, and I thought it was odd, and I thought it was like a bit controlling.
He didn't know it then, but Kapelian was watching the beginning of an abusive relationship.
Didn't see the client for about maybe 5 months, and then when I saw her, she has told me that she had to get a restraining order.
Since then, Kapelian and his staff attended a Cut It Out training, a national program that helps stylists recognize the signs of domestic abuse.
1 out of every 3 women over the course of her lifetime will find herself in a violent relationship.
Middlesex District Attorney Marian Ryan has been conducting trainings since 2009 for professionals and students like this group at the Keefe Technical High School cosmetology program.
Folks who are providing these kind of personal care services may see injuries that are unique in many cases to domestic violence, but that aren't always visible to everybody else. So, for instance, those include things like missing clumps of hair. A lot of times there are strangulation marks, bruises at the base of the neck.
Statewide, there were more than 44,000 restraining orders issued last year, 5,000 of them in Middlesex County. Of course, many domestic violence victims never call police. The hope with this program is that they will get help from their hairdresser.
People tend to often have long-term relationships with their personal care providers.
The training covers the signs of abuse and what a stylist can do, which is offer resources to help. It's a lot for aspiring hairstylist Manoa Viana to think about.
I feel like if you're in that type of situation, it must be very hard to contain your emotions sometimes, and especially if you're feeling vulnerable, and that's something that I need to be on the lookout for.
Oh, I could do 5 o'clock, absolutely.
Naz Kapelian says since the Cut It Out training, he's kept these brochures in his salon and can now spot signs of abuse. He'd encourage a client to get help. It's something he wishes he could have done for the client years ago, whom he now realizes was in trouble.
I would have recognized it before, but I didn't know that much about it. But after the program, now I know.
And District Attorney Marian Ryan says knowing is the first step to helping. Tina Martin, WGBH News.
I'm Judy Woodruff. Tonight on the NewsHour, a shutdown stalemate. President Trump again fails to strike a deal with Democratic lawmakers at the White House. Coming up at 7 after Evening Edition on KPBS.
Big waves are pounding San Diego beaches. This is what it looked like today in Ocean Beach. Waves as high as 12 feet forced lifeguards to close the pier. A high surf advisory is in effect until Thursday night. Dajia Swad has details in tonight's forecast.
We're going to continue to watch more wet weather come into play here for Southern California. Here's a look at the last few hours on the radar, getting moisture in towards Redding, San Francisco, even out towards Fresno. And this is only going to continue to make its way in towards Los Angeles for tonight, as well as into San Diego as we head into your extended forecast. So for tonight, we will notice all that disturbance off the coast bringing rough surf here. High surf advisory in that light shade of blue for San Diego, extending in towards those Los Angeles beaches. That means boating conditions are going to be an issue, as well as if you're doing any swimming or surfing, not going to be safe. As we head into tonight, we're cooling down to 53 in San Diego. Rather cloudy out there. That's because that moisture is in proximity to us. Also going to notice the clouds into Oceanside with a low of 44. Cooling down to 45 in Borrego Springs and 36 in Mount Laguna. But we will not see any showers here tonight. That shower activity going to be more likely as we head into your Friday night into Saturday. So we'll get a brief drying into Thursday. Still going to be some rough seas out across much of the coastal California. And once again, a dry day for Thursday. So sunshine going to be available to us. 64 in Oceanside, 65 in San Diego, out to Borrego Springs, topping off at 73 and 52 in Mount Laguna with some clouds and sun mixing. As you head into this weekend, that's when we'll be looking at some wet weather to try to squeeze its way in towards California. In fact, we have this Omega block. You can see that they're making the Omega symbol, and high pressure in the middle of that, trying to get dry air to stick in place. That moisture going to be trying to nudge its way in, and in fact, is going to force the moisture further south, more likely for us to get in an unsettled pattern for your extended forecast. So for tomorrow, dry at the coast, then we'll begin to see shower activity Friday night into your Saturday. Sunday, clouds stick around with a high of 63 at the coast. Also going to see that same pattern inland. Showers likely Saturday, cloudy conditions Sunday, rain possible on your Monday. Mountains also be looking at wet and chilly conditions through your early week forecasts, and low clouds and wet conditions for the deserts as well as we head into your weekend. Reporting for KPBS News, I'm your AccuWeather meteorologist, Dajia Swad. Back to you.
California has won a couple of legal fights relating to animal welfare. Capitol Public Radio's Randall White says it's the result of the Supreme Court deciding not to get involved.
12 states joined forces to challenge a 2010 California law requiring egg producers to follow California's animal welfare guidelines if they choose to sell their goods in California. On Monday, the Supreme Court declined to hear that case, upholding the requirement. Josh Balk with the Humane Society of the United States says California's push to protect farm animals is on solid legal ground.
It's supported not only in a nonpartisan way by voters, it's also supported by courts made up of judges with different views. So when you have that coalition of minds coming together on one issue, you know you're on the right side of history.
Missouri's Attorney General was the lead plaintiff and says he's disappointed but will continue to fight against what he calls burdensome regulations. The court also declined to hear a case challenging California's ban on force-fed foie gras. That law has been on hold for several years as the case moved its way through the courts. A federal appeals court still needs to issue a final ruling in order for the law to go into effect. In Sacramento, I'm Randall White.
For those fighting Parkinson's disease, the act of fighting might be an effective therapy. Back in July, KPBS health reporter Susan Murphy brought us this story about how boxing is helping patients in San Diego.
Let's get it. Start us off right, Husky. 10 punches on the bag. 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8, 9, 10. Yeah!
Inside a gym in North Park, there's a boxing class that seems pretty typical. Except for one thing, everyone here is fighting Parkinson's disease. The neurological disorder progressively deteriorates motor skills, balance, and speech. Some symptoms can be eased for a short while with medication, but there is currently no cure.
We all fighting the same battle and all wishing the best for the other person, you know.
So these 20 Parkinson's fighters, including Sue Rohde, who was diagnosed with the life-altering disorder 15 years ago,
Chicken wing!
taking matters into their own hands.
This keeps you going and keeps you energetic and muscle control and balance.
Several times a week, they wrap their hands in cloth or put on gloves and push themselves during a 90-minute non-contact boxing workout.
Let's get it!
Jab, jab, straight.
It's tailored to help people with Parkinson's combat their symptoms. Research shows high-intensity exercise like boxing slows the disease's progression.
When I yell cone, you try to grab the cone before your opponent.
I've seen people walk in here hardly able to walk, and within a couple of weeks they're boxing, they're moving around. It's amazing. It really is.
We've missed you.
John Pistachi was diagnosed 3 years ago, but started noticing tremors in his hand long before that.
I really feel like it's slowed down the progression to the point where after 2 years I don't think I've seen that much change in my ability.
6. Ron Locke, a Navy veteran and retired airline pilot, has had the disease for 11 years.
9. And it gives me more energy. It's just overall well-being.
The class is part of a national program called Rock Steady Boxing.
I do not take for granted working with all of you. You guys work really hard. Okay?
It's run by Mike Reeder, who owns the gym.
When you start noticing Parkinson's, the movements get really small. The steps are small. You might be hunched over. But with boxing, you kind of don't have a choice. You put on these big boxing gloves. You feel big and strong.
He's given everyone a fighter nickname.
Can-Do Sue, Rocket, Captain KO, Iron Mike, Husky, The Beast. When they come in the gym, they're a Parkinson's fighter. They're not just a person with Parkinson's.
While these Parkinson's fighters are working up a sweat, researchers in La Jolla are working on a cure.
It's reasonable hope right now. We don't know how long it will take for us to be able to expand this to a larger group of patients.
Jean Loring is a professor at the Scripps Research Institute. She's preparing to launch a clinical trial on 10 Parkinson's patients. It involves transplanting healthy brain cells to replace the cells killed off by the disease.
Even in a culture dish, they want to connect with each other.
Parkinson's destroys brain cells that make a substance called dopamine. Dopamine allows nerve cells to communicate with muscles.
So what we propose to do is to replace those neurons in the brain with the people's own dopamine neurons. We make those neurons by taking a little bit of their skin.
So inside here we've got little vials of millions of different stem cells and neurons.
The skin cells are grown in a lab and reprogrammed in a month's time into a master cell called a pluripotent stem cell.
These cells can make every cell type in the body, including nerve cells.
Loring says the process has taken 5 years to perfect. The transplant has been successfully tested in rats. Now comes the year-long FDA approval process, set to begin this fall.
I can't say the word cure. I'm not going to say the word cure until I actually see the results from our patients and their studies. It'll be like they had functioning dopamine neurons in their brain, like they did before their neurons started dying. And so we expect people to have a full recovery, starting at about a year, and then onward get better and better.
If all goes well during the first trial, she hopes to expand the treatment to a larger number of patients soon after.
Multiple sites, so we should be able to move fairly quickly. When I say quickly, I mean not 10 years, not 5 years, probably less than that.
She says the same therapy could also work for multiple sclerosis, ALS, and Alzheimer's.
Jab, jab, straight, hook, straight, roll, straight.
In the meantime, BoxFit Gym in North Park is providing a safe haven for people battling Parkinson's to keep their disease in check and their spirits high.
Straight! Smiling assassin. Good work.
Parkinson's is a difficult disease for a lot of people, but if they would fight it early, if they would get exercising and join a group like this, it's so helpful.
Big exhale. Excellent fight today. Great job today.
Together, they're determined to keep fighting until the disease is knocked out.
Rock steady! Give each each other love. Excellent, excellent work today.
Susan Murphy, KPBS News.
Looking good, man.
Today, the long-term owner of San Diego's Spreckles Theater has died. The Union Tribune reports Jacqueline Littlefield passed away last week in La Jolla. Services were held recently in L.A. She was 96. Littlefield bought the Spreckles Theater building in 1962 and refused to sell it to developers over the years. Spreckles Theater is the oldest indoor theater in San Diego. Now, here's a look at what we're working on for tomorrow in the KPBS newsroom. On Morning Edition, President Trump at the border will have coverage of the president's arrival in Texas as he calls for a new border wall amid the government shutdown. And on Midday Edition, the science behind supplements. We'll look at the risk and the benefits when it comes to diet and fitness. You can find tonight's stories on our website, kpbs.org/evening edition. Thanks for joining us. Have a great night.